Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to this month's episode of Talking Point, where we delve more deeply into some of the systemic barriers facing women in sport and women's sport in general. I'm your host, Lisa Ingarfield, and I want to take the conversation about women in sport and women's sport to the next level. Let's really dig into some of the deep-seated and persistent problems facing women and think about how we can change the culture. Last month, in our Talking Point episode, we had the pleasure of talking with Nancy Hogshead-Makar from Champion Women. She discussed the pervasive problem of sexual abuse in sport. We talked about the need to tackle this issue from a system level and not just an individual problem. Doing this will allow us to change the culture of acceptance to one of zero tolerance. Today, we're going to continue the conversation with Laura Okmin, NFL and sports broadcaster and founder of Galvanize. Our focus in today's episode is going to be on how women are marginalized in sports media, both in terms of opportunity and their treatment. For over 2 decades, Laura has covered the biggest names on the biggest stages, including over 10 Super Bowls, 2 Olympics, multiple NBA Finals, World Series, and All-Star games. But what Laura is most known for and most proud of is the connections she has cultivated over 20 years of building relationships, not sources. Trust has been the foundation of her interviews, her programs, and her own production company. Laura joined Fox Sports Network in 2002 as a host, anchor, and reporter, and has held numerous jobs in the Fox family ever since. She's currently a sideline reporter for the NFL on Fox, as well as a feature reporter for the NFL on Fox pre-game show. Along with hosting FoxSports.com's coverage of the previous 2 Olympics, traveling to the 2012 Summer Games in London and the 2014 Winter Games in Sochi, Laura has hosted 3 national FSN shows while serving as a feature and sideline reporter for Orange and Fiesta BCS Bowl games. Her other passion is training and mentoring young women entering the sports broadcasting field by putting on seminars around the country with her company Galvanize. Galvanize's mission is to help create, build, and support a network for the next generation of amazing women. Through weekend boot camps, workshops, speaking at universities, high schools, and personal coaching, Galvanize teaches women the tools they need to succeed in the sports world, while turning the so-called competition into allies, because girls compete and women empower. Well, welcome, Laura, to Talking Point. We're very excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to learn about your journey and your trajectory as a sports broadcaster. I know that you've been working in the field for over 20 years, maybe 25 years, and at least for the last 10 or so years, you've been primarily connected to the NFL, but it sounds like you've also been doing a lot more work recently commentating for women's sports, which is exciting, and perhaps we can talk about that a little bit later on in the show. I wanted to begin by hearing your perspective about how you think things have changed for women in the sports broadcasting industry over the time that you've been involved, from the very beginning when you first started out as a newbie all the way to now. I imagine that you've seen a lot of things shift and ebb and flow.
Yes, and I love that you said my journey and my trajectory, because it's funny where I was thinking as you said it, my journey and my trajectory are changing right now. You know, even having been in the business for 25 years, I find myself shifting and changing. And a big part of that, I'm a big dog.
Sorry.
I'm loving the dogs in the background. So it's so interesting to me having the shift in my career, in my life, and at the same time watching this shift right now with women in sports. So I would say when I started 25 years ago, and I used to be so embarrassed to say that, or almost ashamed to say how long I've been in this business, because usually women in this business, you don't get that long shelf life. So I never wanted to say how long that I'd been in this, because I was always very aware isn't a business that women age in. And now I'm so proud of it. You know, when somebody does 20 years, I'll say, give me 25 because I've done it. And so even that shift. And what I would tell you is when I started, I was a very young reporter and from Chicago, and my first job was Montgomery, Alabama. So it was about as deep south as I had ever been. And I was getting my first job doing news during the week and sports in the weekend, and there was no women in Alabama sports at the time, especially Montgomery, Alabama. And I to admit I was very naive about it, because growing up in Chicago and in the Midwest of the United States, it wasn't a gender thing. On Sundays we watched Bears or Packers, or we went to cheer the White Sox or the Cubs. It wasn't gender specific. We loved sports. And I think I was a little bit naive to what was ahead. And so what I can tell you is I got to Montgomery, and I was doing my first live shot at a high school football game, which was a huge, huge deal, those Friday night football games in the South. And I was really excited. It was, I was probably 22 years old, and at that moment thought I made it. Here I am and worked so hard to get here. I'm about to do my first live shot at a football game, and I'm nervous and I'm excited, and I'm having all those, awesome butterflies. And all of a sudden, the coach who I was about to interview was walking up towards me, and he was holding a basketball and a football. And I just kind of, quizzically looked. And as he walked up, he said, I just wanted you to know the difference, little girl, between a football and a basketball. And a basketball is round and a football is oblong. And my stomach did what your reaction was, was how my stomach felt. And it shaped me as a young reporter, because all of a sudden I realized everybody was going into this going, you don't know what you're talking about, or do you know what you're talking about? So suddenly how my career started was every question I asked was longer than the answer that was given, because I had to prove myself so much. So part of that was very much part of the world, and knowing people felt like that. And part of it was probably my baggage now, taking that coach's comment on myself and going, well, I better know that. Every conversation I have or interview, I better be able to make sure everybody knows. I know the difference between not obviously a basketball and a football, but a 3-4 and a 4-3 defense. Or I better explain to them before I ask them about it. I better explain how knowledgeable I am. So what I would say is what shifted so much in my world, and I see now, I don't think that's so much on women's shoulders anymore. I think if you are in sport, you hopefully go in feeling like you know what you're talking about. If I'm holding a microphone, or if I'm covering sports, behind the scenes, I hope that's not as much inbred as it was back then. But what hasn't changed 25 years ago to now, what I would say the biggest thing, Lisa, is the people at the top. There's more women reporters. There's more women sideline reporters. But are there more women executives? Are there more women who are managing editors and producers? And that's where I don't see the shift that I wish. And the only way this business is going to change for women is when women are making decisions. Who we hire, how we cover, and who we cover. And that, to me, is my most disappointing thing in this business. I haven't seen that move.
Yeah, I mean, I'm nodding away here as you're talking, because I think that's so huge. That's beyond your industry. I think that's true across many industries, right? The culture will only shift when there are more women employed in leadership levels who are making the decisions. Why do you think that is? I mean, why do you think then that you've seen these other shifts, but you haven't seen that happen in the highest levels, at the CEOs, at the manager level?
Because there aren't enough women CEOs and management level. I mean, that really is. I think I remember always hearing this and not really knowing if I believed it or not. The older I get, the more I believe it. And what you said in sports and every industry, you tend to hire who looks like you, and even if you're not thinking about it that way, but who you relate to, and all of a sudden you're having an interview and the interview feels more like a conversation, and you see things the same way, or you have the same background. And I feel like that tends to make those executive rooms, those people look alike. And I just know that in doing this all, in 25 years and working at a lot of places and, a few networks and a lot of entities, I've yet to have that female leader. I've had some ahead of me who were my superiors, but there's been nobody that I've had that's been at that executive level. And in sports, we are really, really slow to that. And it's so tough because I don't think it will change until we have women. And that's even a more layered statement, because sometimes you have women who aren't necessarily the women who empower other women. So there's layers to that too. But I don't think it's going to change until we have women at the top who know not just you need to have more women because it's good to have more voices, but it makes your company better. We think differently. We act differently. We hire differently. We make decisions differently. And that, to me, is the value and the beauty of having these boardrooms of people that don't look alike. And I just think we haven't had that yet in sports and many other businesses. But just in my world, we haven't had that yet.
Yeah, and so I think there's a number of things there, right? There's this feeling that women don't belong, both women feeling that, and then perhaps men believing that women don't belong. And then if men are at the top levels and they're hiring people who look like them, even if there are women available to take those spots, they're perhaps systemically discriminated against because of that piece. And then you have kind of this cultural narrative around men and sport, and how it's really sport is a men's realm. It's a place for men. And then I'm just being pulled to mind the Cam Newton comment, which I know that you had tweeted about, where he had articulated that it was funny to hear a woman say something about routes. And so that then just kind of compounds and feeds into this larger narrative that then affects the pipeline, because maybe women and girls don't choose to go in that direction because they don't see that there's a point. And then there's not a large pool of people to be hired, but men hire people who look like them. So I feel like it's really complex.
Yeah. I agree, and that was the shame when Cam Newton said that, because I have always been a fan of Cam's and have got to know him. I've gotten to know him well since he's been in the NFL. And what I would tell you is Cam's not a fan of reporters. I don't care what gender they are, and and what race they are, what they look like. He's had a complicated relationship with reporters since college, when he had some issues, and I know that I spent a year building that relationship with Cam and literally saying to him, I had a season where I think my first 6 of 8 games, without exaggeration, were Panthers games. And so I made a point in training camp to say to Cam before the season, how many people do you trust in this business media-wise? And he was real quick to say nobody. Haven't had a good relationship since college. Don't trust him. Don't know him. Don't want to. And I said, I want to work on that. I want to be that person you trust. And he said, how do you think we'd go about that? Tell me, how you would suggest that. And I said, from this moment until you and I determine, we're going off the record. Everything you say to me, every time I see you, this is for our building of the relationship. I will not go public with this. Test me. And if you want, say anything you want. If it goes anywhere, it's me. And I'm going to do the same with you as you're telling me things. And then I'm talking to your coaches and teammates. And we built this great relationship. So that's what disappointed me about the comment so much, because I didn't expect that from Cam. I know Cam is raised by a strong woman. I know his mother, got on him about that. And so I was so disappointed, because that, to me, of all the issues women in sports face these days, that's not it. Like I said in the beginning, I don't feel like I walk into a room and people are like, oh, what does this girl know? I thought we were past that. And so there's so many things that young women are dealing with right now that I didn't have to deal with, and I'm very thankful I didn't. But that was one I kind of checked the box off to. Going, we're good here. That if you got the job, we're going to assume you know what you're talking about. And what Cam's comment did was open that door again. And that disappointed me. So that's the hardest part for me when you're talking about that is going back to the bosses, going back to who's hiring. If we're getting back to now what we faced 20 years ago, which is, do I want a woman in here because do I know she knows what she's talking about? That really breaks my heart. And right now with the Me Too movement, there's wonderful things about that, amazing things, and there's some tough things we're going to have to figure out, because my fear is now what happens in those rooms is, do we want a woman in here because, can I talk to her about this? Can boys still be boys? And all that boy network that you talked about, that old boy network, now are they going to start looking at it as, well, we've got to be extra careful because now this movement, can we have a woman here and be able to act like ourselves? That's what worries me right now. And so that will lead to less hiring of women.
Oh, that's so fascinating and so also very complex, right? Because it certainly crossed my mind, but I find the argument that men have frequently posited that now I just don't know what sexual harassment and what isn't is a complete cop-out, because where the line is, right? And it's really about respectful behavior to the women in your life, and you know what that looks like. And so you're being held accountable individually and kind of en masse for this. And so it's troubling, and I have a lot of feelings about it that I probably can't articulate well in this conversation. But I think what you're identifying is real, but it again just puts that responsibility back on the backs of women, right? And keeps women silent.
And that's the problem is, and also I know, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
So I think this is what happens with a great conversation when you're passionate. Isn't it funny? You go. I have so much to say. But I think that right now is the tricky part for me. I have a company for young women in sports, and we spend more time on these kind of issues because what I always call it, and what I always say to them is, you need to define your line. You need to know what you're okay with. In a business and in a world in sports, and again, I talk my world because I know it, but this is certainly not just sports. But there's no such thing as black and white. It's all gray. And you've got to figure that out. Are you okay with going to lunch or dinner with a player, a coach, a boss? Are you okay with someone hugging you? Are you okay with when asking for phone numbers, when they ask for yours? I'm very, very, very thankful that I started in Montgomery, Alabama. And it took me a long time to figure out what my line was. And your line moves. And I feel in sports, one of the good things is what they've done is they're more inclusive with young women, and more young women are getting opportunities much sooner than my generation did. And part of me champions that and loves that. And the other part of me was the whole reason, or the whole genesis of starting Galvanize, was because watching these women get hired before they were ready. And the on-camera stuff, I'll teach you to be a better reporter on camera. That's easy. The harder stuff is everything that we're navigating. So what worries me about what you're saying is it puts it back on our backs. And most of these young women who are starting in sports now, they don't have the experience yet, the life experience, to be able to handle that. And that worries me for them. That's what breaks my heart for these young women is, I don't want you to have to learn this the hard way, because that's tough. And we all learn it, but I'm glad I learned it. I'm glad I learned it in a small market versus at a network. And that's what worries me right now is just what's the definition. And you're right. And it's turned into a lot of conversations for me with my male coworkers. And I've been thrilled to have them. I'm the only woman in a very big crew. And so I'm getting all the questions. But we had one the other day when they said, and it was a real earnest question, can I hug a woman at work? And that's kind of been the joke. And I hear that punchline a lot, or that joke a lot. And I never thought it was funny, because that is something that I know, that men think about, or women think about, when you're getting to know someone in a work environment. And I said to them, I'm going to be honest, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, I never would have hugged somebody at work because I'm so super aware and hypersensitive back then about making sure what my reputation was. So I would have never hugged someone. Now I've been doing this 25 years. My relationships are incredible. It's my favorite part about my business is the relationships I built. Of course I hug these guys. They're my friends. I'll be friends with them for years after I stop doing this. So I have no problem with that. And so they're used to that with me, of me always giving them a hug. Or when we walk into a meeting, I'll hug someone that I have a relationship with, which again, I would have never done that before. But what I tell them is don't hug a woman. If you're worrying about it, just don't, you guys. But you know it's me. You know your friendship with me. So of course you can. It's not that hard. And it goes back to what you were saying, Lisa. It's just, the men who are nervous, the men who can't sleep at night, the men who are having trouble figuring this out are the ones who should. It's the ones who, I don't care who you are, you know when you've crossed a line. You know that. You know what position you're putting a woman in. So the men who are going, I don't know, and trying to figure this out are usually the ones I talk to where I'm like, you're good. You've got nothing to worry about. It's those one, that don't worry about this. It's the ones who cross it know they're crossing it. I just believe that firmly. Do you?
Yeah, no, I do. I think that there was this really great piece that I read, and I forget the online publication, but it talked about the myth of the male bumbler and this idea that we write people off as just being men off. We write men off as being stupid, or they just don't get it, or, we'll just, they're just, men can't parent their children, or men can't do this, that sort of behavior. And what that does is it creates a climate where men can get away with doing a lot of stuff that they absolutely know that they're doing, because it's just this kind of like, men aren't capable. And the point of the article was, but how can men, so then if we're saying kind of men aren't capable of figuring out where the line is around sexual harassment, like whether to ask someone to hug them, and yet they're also the CEO of a massive organization, like you can't have both. If you're smart enough to be the CEO of an organization, you're smart enough to know where the line is around intimate touching with a woman coworker, right? And I just think it's a really great piece that made that point very well.
I love that, and I'm obsessed with that piece. I've sent that. At first, I sent that to all my women, where I was like, read this. And then I was like, I got to stop doing that, and started sending it to my men, read this. Like, you need to see this too. I agree with you. And it's just, to me, I think it was in this article, I loved the measure is, would you do this to a male coworker? And that's kind of our joke now, with the men I travel with, when it's something said. I'm like, if you will say that to him, I'm fine with that. Just be careful with that. And to me, what I like to say is, one, would you say it to a male coworker? Two, would you do it or say it when your wife's around? And that to me, like, that's pretty easy. Would you do it if if your boss was around, or your peer, if your COO was around, or president? And usually it's with that male bumbler theory. Those are usually the men who, of course, they wouldn't. They do that very privately. They do that alone. That's not something they're doing in front of a group, and certainly wouldn't in front of their spouse. So, if we have to make this, this direction, and we have to make a rule book, it would be. I swear, Lisa, it would look like we were writing it to a sixth grader or a third grader. It's real basic.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that the fear is we're going to be in charge of that, and we just shouldn't be. It should be really. There's such good men out there who know how to do this, and the fact that we're all shifting for the men who don't is a shame for both sexes.
No, absolutely. And then I'm thinking back to the comment that you had made a few minutes ago about how in your career, you would never have hugged someone because of what that implication might have meant for your reputation. And how that's just a different experience probably than a man who was similarly positioned in their career to you. One, they may or may not have been hugging people, right? But they probably wouldn't have thought about the fact that if I hug someone, that could be detrimental to my reputation, or that could create a narrative around who I am as a person, and how we men and women, in our professional lives live, walk alongside each other, but live and experience things so differently.
Yeah. One of the things I did this football off season. And I brought a group of reporters, but 2 NFL teams gave me their rookies. So I think one had 23 and one had 25. So I brought 23 young women to the Atlanta Falcons and 25 to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I paired each reporter up with a woman. And the first thing I did was, as they were paired up, and I paired them up for certain reasons, certain things they had in common, and it was terrific. But the first thing I did was stood up there in front of the group and had to explain, this is not a hookup. This is not, I don't want to hear that you guys are texting each other. I don't want to hear anybody sliding into anybody's DMs. This is one of the most valuable and invaluable relationships you will both have as you both are beginning your journeys if you don't mess it up. But if you mess it up and if you go over the line, what I will tell you is then you just become another boy or just another girl. And all of a sudden, you can't help each other because the awkwardness begins. And why I learned that was when I started doing media training, and I do that with teams now, I called a player who I had covered for years, probably 10 years. And I said to him, and it was real hard for me to get in with him. He was one of those guys, he called it the bubble. You could not get into his bubble. And so I said, challenge accepted, I'm getting into that bubble. And that took me a couple years to be able to be trusted. And so when I started doing this media training, I called him and said, can you give me some reasons why I got into the bubble? As I'm teaching guys how to vet reporters, how can I say, what did I do that you allowed me in? And one of the things he said was, what I was most proud about with our relationship was you showed me I could have a relationship with a woman and sex wasn't involved. I didn't know I could do that.
Oh, wow.
Right. And so that was one of my favorite things I tell my young women reporters and I tell my young guys, saying to them, if we would have crossed the line, then I would have never been able to help him tell his story for over 10 years. And I helped him a lot tell his story. And he helped me a lot as I started a production company and started doing shows and started meeting players who knew me and trusted me to allow me in a different way. And if we would have crossed that line, neither of us would have helped each other. So I say that saying, I do think there's some teaching that needs to be, going on. And that's not sports. That's boys and girls, girls and boys. You throw them together and that happens. And so I think there's part of me that goes, there needs to be teaching in terms of how you help each other and what happens when you don't cross that line and how you can really help each other on their journeys. So it's complicated, but again, who wouldn't say that about dating when they were 13, or 33 or 43 or 53? It's complicated. And so I understand that now everybody in a work setting adds another layer to it. But boy, I just wish everybody understood the value in having these great relationships and trusting each other and opening up and not crossing that line. And again, both ways.
Yeah, and I think that there's an interesting power dynamic that happens that is gendered to some extent, right? When you have a young woman reporter who's engaging with the NFL or engaging with a famous or high-profile athlete and trying to build a relationship. But there is a power dynamic there in terms of how well that interview goes or how well that relationship goes directly speaks to the quality or capacity of the journalist. And how did you navigate that throughout your professional career?
Defining my line, okay. and again, it's you learn that by making mistakes, and you just hope your mistakes are a step over and not 6 steps over. But you learn that by, and again, that's what I always say to my young women. Let's define your line. Let's do this conversation right now. We do a lot of that role playing. Okay, so you've gone up to a player and you've said to him, I want to build this relationship. I want to build this trust with you. How do we do this? So you begin this relationship. And then if he says to you, well, then why don't we go out and have dinner? Why don't we go out and have lunch and get to know each other? Or a coach says that, or an owner says that, or a general manager says that. Let's have that conversation now. So you already have played that out in your head. So we do that in a room of 25 women, and our answers are all different. And the one thing that we all commit to is there's no judging because everybody's line is different. So what I would tell you is, what I tell these young women, I'd rather in the beginning, I'd so much rather you went to one extreme. So again, no lunch, no dinner, no hugging, all of that, because it will change as you get older and more comfortable. So what I would tell you is 20 years ago, I would have never done any of those. I would have been so sensitive to the fact that my reputation would have been damaged, and I would have been ostracized in this business, because back then that's what happened. So I was hypersensitive to that. But now, after all these relationships, after building these relationships and getting to know everyone, I absolutely do a lunch or a dinner because I know these people. So my line has changed. And but it was by me slowly moving it as I got more confident in myself. I'm not going to be put in an uncomfortable situation right now, because I will not let myself be. But let me be really clear when I say this. I have been in horribly uncomfortable, embarrassing, agonizing, life-changing, life-defining moments before this. So every one of those experiences has gotten me to this confident place right now. But that took a long time for me to get there. So I'm real careful with my young women, because I can tell them about all my experiences and all my horrible bosses and all the things that I went through, and beg them not to do it, because I want to save them so badly, but I also know they have to go through it. So what I try to do is at least give them somebody who's not judging and go, hey, you've defined your line, but if you go over, call me. Don't be embarrassed to call me. Let's talk about it, because it's hard. And exactly what you said is you put your finger on it. People always talk about sexism in sports, and I laugh at every time they talk about this locker room atmosphere. I have had no life-defining, career-defining, changing moments in a locker room. It's pretty easy to navigate that. It really is. It's uncomfortable. But it's awful in the beginning, and it's still, I will tell you, the worst place to be in and the least sexiest place to be in. But it's in offices. It's in boardrooms. Those are the places that are the hardest to figure out. So every time people talk about sports, I'm like, it's not in the locker room. That's really easy. The things we have to deal with are the ones behind a closed door. And we keep hearing more and more of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's where that piece around power comes back, because it's you can define your line. Absolutely. And I think teaching young women who are wanting to enter any field, it's important for them to know what's appropriate and inappropriate behavior. And there is a hard and fast line. If someone crosses, like, that it isn't okay, right? That there's whether or not it's illegal, but there's a pretty bright line, and that, goes back to our earlier conversation. But then there's that other space that is, how do you engage with people who have power over you? And it's just hard.
Yeah. And I'm sure every one of us, and pretty much every one of us who has gone through it, and there's been a whole lot, I sit and I wonder, because I can look back to my experiences now and feel really bad for that young woman. And go, I wish she would have handled it this way. I wish I would have done this. And I don't know if you ever handle that the right way at that moment, because every time, I don't care how many times you go through that, most of us do many, it surprises you, especially that first time. And I know my first really bad one, because there's always, we can all point to, a whole bunch of ones that were uncomfortable, but exactly, it might not be a fireable or an illegal offense. They're just awkward, uncomfortable ones that make you, But I know when I was hired in Chicago, which was a big jump for me as a young reporter, and I was young, and I'm a Chicago girl, so that was a big deal to go home. Looking back, I certainly wasn't ready for it, but I thought I was. I think I had 2 years experience, so I thought I knew it all. But I can tell you that I had a boss who knew how desperate I was to come home. My mom had just passed away, and I was alone in Chattanooga trying to start a career for myself, and going through a whole lot with my mom dying unexpectedly. And I was very open about that, of saying how badly I want this job. And in a million years, I wouldn't have thought that would have been a negative. That was me saying, I'm not trying to come here for a year. I want to go home. And what I can tell you is that bit me real quickly. That all of a sudden he started putting me in situations and would say to me, I thought you said that you were appreciative. I thought that you said that you owed me so much because I was bringing you home. So why can't I tell you to turn around and let me check out your skirt? Why can't I tell you to wear a skirt? And I would go, back then I was traveling with covering the Bears. So he knew which hotel I was at. And started calling me every night on the road. And when I wouldn't answer, I have a boss who then could say, why aren't you answering? Because when you don't answer, I think maybe you're going out and you're playing. Why aren't you there at 10 o'clock at night when I call your room? And so I remember going through all of that and being, all of 24 years old and thinking to myself, did I ask for this by telling him? Maybe I'm at fault here. Maybe I let him believe that I did owe him something more than a thank you and doing a great job. So that part, going back to what you first asked, that hasn't changed. Nothing in that has changed. My young women still call me. I just got a call 2 nights ago, a very similar situation. And in the middle of this climate, kind of going, are you kidding me that you guys aren't sort of getting this right now? Like, be careful right now. But so with power, what worries me most is it's always the most vulnerable. It's the women or the young men or the women who can't handle it, who don't know how to handle it. And I think you don't figure that out until you get older and you're battle tested. And by then, I think very frequently you're not getting tested as much because men can figure that out, that you're not going to put up with that. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think you've just highlighted the system that's the problem, right? Is because that women shouldn't even having to be facing this no matter what their age is, right? They shouldn't be put in the situation that you were put in Chicago. Like that was sexual harassment, and that was absolutely fireable behavior, right? And yet there wasn't really a system of support for you. You were younger. You weren't able to navigate and identify that your boss was the person to blame and not you. But the fact that you even had to experience that and that women still experience that is the problem, right? Yep. It's that we still don't have an equitable playing field within industry, within sports journalism, as a very specific example, where that's never thought about. Like, it's probably always at the back of a young woman's mind to some degree, right?
Very much so. And I know back, and this hasn't changed very much at all, my fear was if I would have said something, and to be honest, that never occurred to me because I wouldn't have known who to say something to be honest. I was just so afraid of it. Right. But if I said something, I was going to be labeled. So who else was going to hire me? Because now they're going to question. And I do remember being a young girl and thinking that way of, boy, there's not many women in this business and I'm in it and I don't want to mess this up. And so when I talk to, men now and, they're trying to figure out the line, and I'll tell them stories like that. Sadly, there's many more, but let's say I bring up that story. They real quickly go, well, I get that. And I say to them, I understand listen, like any movement, all of a sudden it's going to shift way too over to one side. Sometimes that happens, and we kind of have to figure that needle out. So all of a sudden, I'm the first one to go, listen, you guys, when you say you look pretty today, I'm not going to HR. That's not what I'm talking about. But what I'm talking about is this example. Do you think that's okay? And they'll all go, no, that's horrible. You dealt with that. So I want them at least to see that. And again, the pendulum's swinging right now. The needle's moving, as everyone's trying to figure out what is okay. But any woman would tell you, most women will tell you, I hate to say that, I just said any, many of us will tell you in this business at least, listen, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about exactly what you're saying, Lisa, which is the men who have power over me, who are making me feel like my job and my trajectory are dependent on my relationship with you and what I do and what I don't do. And that's the heart of everything, not you look pretty today. Right. I mean, a caveat there, unless that's part of your boss who's saying that to you, right? Like, I think there's context. Yeah. But again, that goes back to making sure that we're really clear with this, and it goes back to everything you're saying. It's now back on us too. Right. It's don't minimize this and don't make this about, can I hug you and can I tell you look pretty? That it's just kind of maddening. That that's not what we're talking about. That is a part of it. That it's a part of it where, again, are you going to tell me I look nice in the middle of the newsroom? And, and if you do, and usually, again, they're not going to do that behavior when it's not one-on-one. But I try so hard for men to understand those examples and go, we're not complaining about just, feeling icky or being whistled at. This is something that that we feel shame about, that we're angry about, that affects not just our jobs, but it affects our lives and our mental health.
Yeah, right on. I mean, the shame piece is huge, right? And then the self-doubt and the blame and that, this feeling that you've done something or that your career hasn't progressed because you didn't do something. Yes. And just kind of there is this gatekeeper mentality. And because there are so few women in the sports industry, at large, and then in broadcasting in particular, that it's so pervasive and so challenging. And then with your company, with Galvanize, it sounds like you're trying to create a broader network of women who can support each other so that God forbid something like that happens, there's individuals to turn to for support. I mean, yes. It's more than that, I realize, Galvanize, but that's one piece of it, right? Building those connections so that folks have networks and they're not alone.
To me, that's the biggest piece because, again, they'll come and they'll talk about, it started off the company. I would get all the young women who wanted to be on camera. And I get that. That's what I've done for a long time. But I get a lot of young women who want to be sideline reporters, and I do not let them leave a boot camp, a 2-day boot camp, without having a bigger answer. Because at the end of the day, I love sideline reporting. I've done it for a long time. I'm still doing it, so I still find the value. But at the end of the day, my Sunday is a minute and a half on camera. And I've worked just as hard as my male peers all week. And so it's real hard to walk away on a Sunday and go, woo, I dominated, because you're leaving 98% of what in your notebook or on the field. And so where I got my value in sports is when I started a production company, when I had to go out and get a corporate sponsor and get money and then go hire a crew and negotiate airtime and negotiate commercials. And that's when I went, I didn't even know I was that smart. I didn't know I could do that. So I know I learned a whole lot during that period. I want these young women to know their value, and it's so much more than a minute and a half on Saturday or Sunday. Right. And going back to what you were saying, I didn't have a network of women. I didn't have any peers going through this, so I kept everything to myself, and I didn't have any mentors. And I'm not judging that, because back then it was every sister for herself, because we were just trying to make it. Right. And so there's a real selfishness to that. But then I got to a point where I think a lot of women do, where all of a sudden I started meeting some great women and going, oh my God, my whole life I've been so proud of the fact that I'm a guy's girl and I've been with men and traveled with men. But all of a sudden I realized my world had been missing a lot without great women. And so what I wanted to do, was give these young women something I didn't have, which is a network of women. So Galvanize it's amazing. And, again, we work on the on-camera stuff, even if you don't want to be on camera, because that's confidence, for you to be able to stand there, look in the camera or interview an owner or a player of whatever sport. It takes a lot of confidence to that, and have a great conversation and know how to small talk with, when you're 18 years old, and to be able to walk up to a head coach and have him follow your lead is a great confidence booster. But the biggest thing is, after 2 days, these young women don't want to do anything without each other. The first thing I say to them is everything we do, we're doing together. Every interview, you're all watching. Every stand-up, you're all watching. And they look like they're all going to throw up when I say that. And I always say to them, at the end of the 2 days, I promise you, you would be angry at me if I split you up. And that's what happens. But that took me a boot camp to figure out, because the first boot camp, I watched every young woman walk in that room and size each other up. And I watched everybody judging everybody. And I had to come up with exercises really quickly to go, how do I make a room of women, no matter what their age range, and I've had 18 to 40s, so how can I get this room to support each other, to fall in love with each other, and understand that there's enough success for all of us in this room? And so that's what I love most about Galvanize is watching that click. And that's from the second they walk into that room until the end. It becomes this really tight group of women, and mostly women who always thought that they were guys, girls, because they're coming in going, I've always loved sports. I've always played sports. I've always been more comfortable around the guys because there's not a whole lot of women who think like me. And all of a sudden they walk into a room and everybody is thinking the same way. And that's magical. So what I always tell them is, there might be 20 of us in a room, or there might be 12 of us in a room. But the only thing I ask of everybody as they leave, I need you to bring this galvanized spirit. I need you to galvanize at your workplace or your school, wherever you are, because even though there's 20 of us, that gives the opportunity of 20 places to change, that culture to change. And all you need in one building is one woman to go in and find the other women. And usually in sports, there's not many. So you go seek out those women and you go, I'm coming in sisterhood. You know, what I want, I'm going to do this. Let's work on helping each other and supporting each other. And you just changed a culture. So I look at it as, if I have a boot camp of 20 women, that helped change 20 places. And that's what I love most. So what Galvanize will say is, you know, you will be better on camera. Your interviews will be more conversational. They will be conversation, not interviews. You will get to go to an NFL team or an Olympic hockey team and partner up. And those are awesome things. But at the end of the day, that empowerment of themselves and each other is what I hope is the definition of Galvanize.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is extremely powerful because your comment about your early days in this work with very few women in the industry. And so it felt like there was a level of competition, right? Everyone was out for themselves because there was only so much to go around. And that's certainly a structural or a system issue that leads women to believe that. So you're bucking the trend, you're pushing back on that and saying that's not how it is. There's success for everyone and we really need each other. And I really think that that's very powerful and important as these women move forward in their careers. And as hopefully, coming full circle back to the beginning of our conversation where we were talking about there's not enough leadership, there's not enough women in leadership in the sports industry. And so the more women can stay connected and move through the ranks, so to speak, together, then that culture will eventually shift, hopefully.
100%. I love that, Lisa. And also I know I'm so big on great men. You know, like I'm always careful when I'm always talking about Galvanize and sisterhood because our biggest allies are great men. And there's so many of them. And that's one of the big disappointments with everything going on now is that, you know, that I'm always making sure that I'm championing the good guys as well. And that also was part of it. So every time I bring 25 women to an NFL team and I bring a media guide of every one of these young women's headshots and all their information, their experience, what they want to do, because I always tell the women, I want you to stand out because walk into this building and make this building go, she was fantastic. You know, she's terrific. So I work with all these men who get to know these women and then go, she was great. What do we have open for her? How do I get her in the business? And so it also, what I want to do is bring all these women in there. So all of a sudden that they realize how much that changes the building, just having more women in there. And that's what what I love most are these men who have to realize they've got to hire women. And it makes it's any conversation, you know, that if it's just a bunch of men standing around talking, I don't care what they're talking about, and all of a sudden one woman walks into a conversation, there's going to be at some point where they go, I didn't think about things like that. Right. Or like, never thought about it that way. Yeah. It adds so much to any room we're in. And the same way if it was, you know, vice versa. If we're all a bunch of women are standing around and have that man in there who says that, they're going to add that different element. And I think the good men understand that too, that they want to be in a room where everybody looks different and it makes your building so much better.
Yeah, and then I just think there has to also be a ripple effect around these conversations and around Galvanize and the work that you're doing that trickles into also the representation of women's sport, right? So if there are more women reporters in the industry and there are more women's voices and women's stories are being elevated in a way that is different to, you know, what has been historically considered normal in sport, we as a public, as a community, as sports fans, have access to great women's sports too.
Totally. I love that. One of my favorite things to do is covering the Olympics for a million reasons. But one of the greatest things when I did my first one was all of a sudden doing so much. I never interviewed women athletes so much. You know, I had done some Final Fours. I had done, you know, so I had done some coverage of women, but never at the level of the Olympics. And what I found was one, they're so excited to tell their stories, but they're reluctant. It's so typical of women, where I know when I train male athletes, I'm always like, you have a microphone in front of your face. That doesn't mean you should use it. Now, what I tell women athletes is, you have a microphone in your face. You better figure out how to use it. It's very different, because men will talk about anything, even if they're not well-versed, and it's that confidence. Women are so much more reluctant to share their story. We don't want to sound like we're bragging. We don't want to talk too much about ourselves. So all of a sudden, you get to this place where women athletes, are so central and just so important, obviously to the Olympic Games. And I love it because you haven't heard those stories before, and they're these amazing stories of what they've overcome. And it's such a shame whenever I leave the Olympics, I go, okay, well, it's going to take me 4 more years to do these great stories again, because we just don't cover women's sports the same way. And when we do, it has to be, an ESPNW. It's right. And that's what disappoints me, because a great story is a great story. An athlete's story is a great story. It doesn't matter if they're men or women. To reach the levels they do, they have had incredible stories of spirit. And that will not change if we don't have women in power who understand the value of telling a woman's story, not just to other women, but the importance of women's stories the same way that we want to hear about a male athlete and what they've overcome and how inspiring it is. And I'm amazed that needle hasn't moved in 25 years.
Yeah, we have a lot of catch up to do there. And I think part of the reluctance for women athletes to talk about themselves is just that for the construction of gender and womanhood and femininity and being quiet and staying in the background, and then you couple that with sport that has been cast or created as a very masculine space, and so it just then how to navigate that. Like, you're giving me an opportunity to speak my truth, to share my story with you. I don't understand, right? So there's like this cognitive dissonance that happens because women have been systematically excluded from sport and from sports broadcasting. And now there's perhaps this opportunity and you don't know how to manage it. It's hard.
It's hard. And I really do think part of that really is, I know the difference when I do media training, the male athletes and women athletes, we do a lot on what's your story. Just having to figure out your story. A lot of people you'd be amazed at, you wouldn't be, but so many people would be, about how many athletes haven't done that. But then you think about it and go, well, have I done that? What is my story? And I know I struggled with that. Everything changed with me probably when I was about 40 and went through my hardest times. And my breakdown / breakthrough moment was when I was going through a tough time, and all of a sudden found myself literally halfway up a 50-foot pole, I think it was, or an 80-foot pole, and not wanting to jump off of it. And that was the whole exercise of having to do that. And the coach not letting me come down, and me going, I don't want to do this, I'm coming down, and him making me sit there, 25 feet up and saying, okay, what's going on right now? What are you worrying about? And all of a sudden I had a breakdown, because I started thinking, my whole life has been about asking other people about their adversity. My whole life, it's been about asking, what's your story? Now I'm sitting here at the worst time of my life, and metaphorically and literally halfway up a pole that I need to leap off of, realizing, what am I doing with adversity? I want to climb down. I don't want to overcome. And it was a real big moment for me. And from that moment on, I went, what's my story? I've got to stop hiding behind everybody else's, and I've got to learn mine. And so it changed me, obviously as a woman and as a human being, but as a reporter, of really understanding how to ask people who they are and how to help them in that journey, and realizing so many people hadn't done that. I'm a great football player, basketball player, equestrian, I'm a great swimmer, but let's really figure this out now and go a whole lot deeper than what you do. Let's go to who you are. And I find, again, men will play that a little bit easier, that they'll dive a little bit. But when I get with women, that's harder for them. They don't want to cry. They don't sometimes want to go that deep. They're scared to. Again, they're scared to be that vulnerable. And I always thought it would kind of be vice versa. But I feel the male athletes I've interviewed, and we've really done this, they appreciate the therapy session. I have found women athletes are real reluctant to do it. It's got to be a lot more gentle, and it's got to take more time. But I think it is because we have that fear of how vulnerable do I want to be it publicly, especially on camera, when I'm trying to show that I'm this terrific, strong warrior athlete, and I don't want to fall into that trap of now crying on camera like a little girl or being weak like a little girl. Yeah,
gosh, it's so interesting. I mean, it's so how gender is constructed and how that's playing off with men and with women who you interview, and you're trying to encourage them to share their story, and the pressure around performing in a certain way, like off the field, so to speak, right? It's not also about how you are on the field. It's how you perform off the field and what those effects might ultimately be, and how our culture and our perceived or the perception that we will be judged by how we behave or how we share our story limits our capacity to really engage.
It really does. And again, what I would say is I was victim to that up until that, leaping off a pole, where that changed everything with me, where I was like, let me find more poles that I can leap off of. Not literally, I do not like jumping off things, but figuratively, it felt so good. I had to break open everything. And I'm careful with that because everybody finds that at different times of their life, if they do. But I know that the first time I went and spoke to about 350, 400 women, and they were all women engineers. And that was the first time I had done speaking outside of the sports world with women. And I was really nervous because I was thinking, okay, they're not sports fans, kind of throwing that stereotype. They're engineers. So most of them are not going to be sports fans. They're not going to know my language, and I certainly don't know their language. I cannot have a conversation with them. And it was one of my most favorite rooms I've ever been in because it wound up that we all speak the same language as women. And it turned into all the exercises I was saying I do with my young women. I do that with my 50-year-old women that I coach, or my 60-year-old women. We all struggle with that. And if that is, that's culturally, that's society, that's, it's everything. So I'm real careful because whenever I do interviews, they usually are about sports. And I realize this isn't just sports. I mean, this is one business, but it's all male-dominated businesses. And tell me one that isn't. Most of them are. Right. And again, it's just we're in a society where men and women are trying to figure it out right now, especially women. We're finding our voices. How do we use them? And that's a real scary pole to leap off of for most of us.
Yeah, and that's kind of a beautiful way to end this conversation. I think that we each have to find our 80-foot pole metaphorically and figure out how we can take that leap of faith, right? However that's for us, but part of that is owning and being able to share our story as women and create space for that and really, continue to push back and say my story has value too.
And I'll just add one thing to it, because one of my favorite lessons from that was, before I did that, it really, I would say, before I did this exercise, I was looking around the room. There were about, 10 of us doing it. And I looked to see who was going to be the one to break down in the poll. Who was going to be the one to cry? Because it wasn't going to be me. I don't cry publicly. I don't share my emotions publicly. So, at that point, I wasn't talking about myself. And I had a massage to get to after that appointment. So, after that exercise. So I was moving it. And I was watching, and there was a young pregnant woman. And I spotted her immediately and was like, that's the one. She's got hormones going. She's got emotions going. She's going to be the one that breaks down. She, flew through that poll. Everybody did, and then I was about halfway through the group, and then when I got up and all of a sudden went, oh no, and started crying and went, I can't believe it's me. And that took everybody had to talk me down, or talk me up, I should say, talk me up. And the woman who took the lead on that was a pregnant woman who really walked to the pole and started saying to me, I've known you for 1 hour, and I already know if you climb down right now, you are going to curse yourself out all night. You are never going to enjoy this trip because you're going to be so angry at yourself. So she talked me up to that pole when I jumped. And when we finished this exercise and we all went around and everybody talks about what you learned, and they got to me and everybody started laughing because, obviously I had gone through the most and held everybody up. But then this young woman said, "Can I take your turn?" And I was like, gladly. I have shared more than I want to share with this group, so please take it. And what she said was, "I'm here at this place because I'm scared to death about being pregnant and having this baby. I never wanted to be a mom. I don't know if I'm going to be a good mom." And then I found out I was having a girl. And I'm not a girl's girl. And I didn't know if I was capable of that. And I didn't know until I helped you go through that. And one of the reasons why I struggle on my pole is losing a mom at a young age and needing that and wanting that. And so what I always share is, not only was that a huge moment, that leap for me to go through, but I'm so blessed that I got to help somebody on her journey as well. And so there's a beauty about leaping and learning your lesson, but you also don't know who you're holding hands with and leaping with. And that's a pretty magical lesson too. And especially for someone, I know me, that was real, I'm going to do this by myself. I don't need anybody. I've got this. And it was really wonderful, one, to find out how great it feels to have somebody help, and two, to have it be another woman was pretty awesome.
That's a great story. I love that because you don't know who you're taking with you. And when I think about, all the times that you've been seen on TV or all the times that you have written a piece or been reporting, that you are likely affecting someone's image of themselves or their belief in their capacity to do something. And I think that there's that connection, which obviously Galvanize more explicitly addresses, is happening all over the place, right? And it's I think that is one of the most important things as women that we can do to support each other, is just to know that we can be there implicitly and explicitly for people. So
I love it.
Thank you so much, Laura, for your time today. It was a wonderful conversation. I really appreciated your insight and wisdom and sharing your experiences with us here at WiSP.
Lisa, I so appreciate it. And I mean, did we even record this? I thought this was just you and I having a terrific conversation.
Well, it was terrific, and I think it was being recorded. It's been a wonderful hour chatting with you, and I look forward to talking with you more in the future.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
Thanks again to Laura Okmin for sharing her perspective and expertise about women in sports media. There certainly is a lot to think about and digest from our conversation. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Talking Point and that it sparked further questions and interest. Talking Point can be found at wispsports.com and on WiSP Sports Radio, which is available on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play for download to your podcast player. With over 700 episodes across 30 unique shows and a global audience of 1.5 million, WiSP Sports Radio is the world's largest network of podcasts for women's sport. If you have comments about this month's show or any other Talking Point episode, you can reach us at info@wispsports.com, or you can reach me directly at Tridedify, TRITODEFI, on Twitter and Instagram. Thanks for listening.